This episode of The Edge is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek.fm at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
You're listening to Trek FM.
What have you done out there on the edge of Federation space?
Hello and welcome to The Edge, Trek FM show about Star Trek Discovery. I'm Mike, and we'll be joined later on by Amy and Brandon and a couple of guests to talk about the latest episode of Discovery, Episode 3, Context is for Kings. But before we get into that, we have a little segment that we wanted to do about Star Trek Discovery's first tie-in novel, David Mack's Desperate Hours. And to discuss that book briefly with me is Duncan from Primitive Culture. How's it going, Duncan?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for staying up past your bedtime to talk about this with us.
It's well past my bedtime in the UK, yeah. But then I have a 2-year-old, so my bedtime's fairly early, as these things go.
I see. Well, Desperate Hours. This is the book that David Mack wrote, which is the first novel for Star Trek Discovery, but it's a unique situation in that Discovery is a very serialized show, as we're starting to discover. Hey, and they also have some allies in the room, mainly in the form of Kirsten Beyer, who is very well aware of what's involved with writing these tie-in novels, and so they're taking a very Star Wars approach to it all and trying to create a cohesive whole in terms of the show and the ancillary materials or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's interesting to see how well they did that first, what approach they decided to go about with that, and also how effective it is, and more than anything, what it means for us as viewers of the show, how it impacts the way that we watch the show. This isn't going to be an in-depth discussion. If you want an in-depth discussion, I highly recommend heading over to Literary Treks on Sunday and checking out episode number 206, in which Dan and Bruce will talk to David Mack, the author of the book, about Desperate Hours. I'm sure that that's going to be very, very interesting and much, much more in-depth. But as the show about the show, we wanted to look at how the book impacts the show. So I guess my first question to you, just in a general sense, what did you think about Desperate Hours?
I enjoyed it. I mean, I have to say I don't read a lot of Star Trek novels. I used to, when I was a kid watching Star Trek in the sort of mid-90s. I feel like I used to read quite a lot of the novels then. And I mean, it's kind of interesting approaching this book because, as you say, because it's a very continuity-driven series, and they've gone with this idea. I mean, the first 2 episodes that we saw were kind of almost a prologue to the main event of the series. This book is kind of a prologue to that. It's set a year earlier, so it's quite different from the kind of Star Trek novels that I always used to read when I used to read more of these. Were the ones that kind of slotted in between. There might be a note at the top saying this story takes place between this episode and that episode, and it's kind of very much just an extra adventure, in the lives of the Enterprise crew or whatever. And I suppose what was interesting about this book is, in some ways, it did kind of fulfill that. I mean, the main plot line, the main storyline feels like it could kind of be an episode of any Star Trek series, if you know what I mean. You could see this on TNG, you could see this on Voyager, I suppose. But really, I guess what they're doing with it is trying to find a way to weave in a little bit of the backstory and a little bit of the kind of background to some of these characters, particularly, I suppose, because there was a lot of controversy around the fact that Michael Burnham had this, relationship with Sarek and Amanda, and therefore, is she kind of Spock's sister? What's the relationship between the two of them? And that isn't really hasn't been addressed so far on screen at all. But I suppose knowing that that's one of the big questions that people are going to have coming to Discovery, I feel like in some ways, that seemed to be the heart of the book for me, was trying to get to the heart of, how does she feel about Spock? What is her relationship with Spock? And kind of trying to make something of that.
Yeah, I think I had a similar reaction. The main conflict in the book, the problem that they're trying to solve is, there's nothing wrong with it, but at the same time, it's not tremendously compelling to me. Like you're saying, it could be an adventure in any, Star Trek show or like any franchise, really, in a lot of ways. The interesting part to me was really sort of like the way that this story was placed within the historical context of, well, really the franchise on the whole, but also within the, Discovery itself, and sort of by extension, giving the reader maybe a less abstract idea of where the show fits into Star Trek's history, because you can say like, oh, it's a year after The Cage, it's 10 years before the original series. But when you think about, how that show looks and feels, the original series, compared to how Discovery looks and feels, there's just something in your brain which does not, mesh. And by doing this in, the prose format, I think that you're sort of allowed a lot of, I guess, leeway in a sense, because you can describe as much detail as you want, but you can also leave out as much detail as you want. And by doing that, you really let the reader fill in the blanks, which I think is kind of necessary in this case. But it really, to me, did a good job of, kind of showing that, yes, Burnham is a contemporary of Spock's, even if we're not going to see Spock, and that sort of thing. And I also do like the idea of this being, like you're saying, a tie-in novel in the traditional sense, but for maybe a series which we didn't get, it's Star Trek Shenzhou, and that to me was really cool, because we have seen a Shenzhou series. It lasted 2 episodes. They aired back to back on September 24th. And, this is, the one tie-in that we have to that. And I think that it really does sort of expand on what they were doing in that first 2 episodes. And I like the fact that they released it before episode 3 aired, because you're still in that mindset. You're still, kind of like in the world of the Shenzhou, and you can read this story without, in some ways, being tainted by what's coming next. And it really places you in that world much more firmly, so that when you're ripped out of it with episode 3, it's even more jarring in some ways. I don't know, what do you think about that?
No, I think that's true. Absolutely. We're going to talk a bit later about episode 3 and how sort of different that is, I suppose. But one of the things that I felt watching the 3rd episode is it kind of made me think, well, actually the first 2 were very Star Trek. Do you know what I mean? This seems quite new. And I guess the novel feels very much, even more Star Trek than the kind of 2-part pilot was, in a sense. And it definitely, I had the same reaction. I got to the end of this book, and it made me kind of wish we had a Star Trek Shenzhou series. It made me start thinking maybe they could do an animated series. I was thinking, I wonder how much Michelle Yeoh would charge to just do a few voiceovers, and they could, or comics or something. They definitely, I think it's kind of a missed opportunity if we don't see more of that ship, and how that works. I guess the other thing that the novel really set up more clearly than what we saw on screen was a bit more about Saru's character and particularly his relationship with Michael Burnham, because what we discover, and it kind of plays out, I think, more in the third episode in some ways than in the first two, is that they were up for the same job and she basically got promoted. He had seniority and she got promoted over his head. And so that kind of bickering and sparring relationship that we see on screen, which I have to say, I sort of thought, I mean, I kind of liked it, but I also sort of thought, well, are they kind of just trying to do Spock and McCoy again? It seems a bit too obvious somehow as a kind of, a way of recapturing something from the original series. But when you get into this thing about, Saru's ambitions and Saru's and his psychology a bit more and how he feels about her, I felt it does kind of make a lot more sense of kind of where they've got to at that point that we first meet them on screen.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was kind of watching for that, and I guess when I was reading the book, having seen, episodes 1 and 2 already, I was kind of thinking that they were going to go in a different direction with their relationship. But, hearing you describe it right now, I think that you're right, that it really is almost like a mirror of what happens in episode 3. And, with where basically the roles are reversed and everything like that, she was promoted over him and now he's essentially promoted over her. And I was really kind of surprised in a way by the amount of friction between those two characters in episode 3. But I think that the book does a pretty good job of really laying the groundwork for that in a way that the first 2 episodes don't. Not that it doesn't work if you don't read the book, but I think that the book definitely enhances it,
It gives you a sense there's something, it's not just a kind of, because I think the danger is on screen, it seems like it's played for laughs, and you have the captain making jokes about them, bickering the whole time and so on. So because it feels very much like a kind of retread of Spock and McCoy, which is, essentially just a kind of comedic element in a sense. I think what the novel does is it kind of gets to the nub of something a bit grittier somehow underneath that. And the fact that, Saru, and from what we've seen of him so far in these first few episodes, he's not, I would say, the kind of lovable character that we maybe expected, thinking of him as, he's going to be the Data, he's going to be the outsider, the oddball, the odd character. Especially in the third episode, there are kind of questions around his loyalties and and how much do we know about him? And the novel is helpful because I think it explains a bit more about some of the ways that he reacts that maybe are quite surprising. We've never seen his species, the Kelpians, before. We find out in those first couple of episodes, he sort of seems to be scared of everything, which is an odd characteristic in a Starfleet officer. We don't kind of find out how has he ended up in Starfleet. I was sort of thinking it was going to be a kind of, Tasha Yar story where he was rescued by Starfleet. And in the novel, in fact, that is what it turns out to be, which kind of makes sense of it. But I think also it makes that aspect of his personality somehow feel more believable because it goes into a bit more detail about him being from this species that's sort of been hunted, that's been this prey species, which he does mention on screen. And I suppose one of the things I thought was quite interesting about it is it puts it all in terms of anxiety, that basically he's someone suffering from kind of crippling anxiety, on and off, which I think is quite an interesting way of looking at it, because watching it on screen, you could think, he's just scared of everything. But there's actually a bit more to it than that. It's that he is very sort of hypersensitized to threat and to any kind of threat. And he has those things that we've seen that whip out the side of his head when he perceives a threat. But I don't know, I just sort of felt like when we saw the trailer, there was that line in the trailer about sensing the coming of death that put a lot of people off. Even in the first couple of episodes, it sort of made a bit more sense, but at the same time, the explanation was all a little bit vague and a little bit oblique. The novel, I felt like it put enough into it, and it put enough into the question of like, how does he deal with human crew members? How does he relate to other people? How does he relate to Michael Burnham? How does he relate to Number One from Pike's Enterprise? That I felt like we got to know him a little bit more as a character. I got more of a sense of who this person actually is than I have from the show, even 3 episodes in, where he always seems a little bit at a distance somehow.
Yeah, well, we're lucky in the book in that we get to spend some time with Saru, where he really is, I mean, kind of like a secondary character in the show so far. I'm sure that he'll be expanded upon in future episodes, but as of right now, you know, where you're laying the groundwork for this world, you know, and the character of Burnham, and there's so many like drastic shifts already, you know, you don't really have time to spend on individual characters like Saru yet. So I do think that it was kind of interesting because, I mean, it is such a bizarre backstory, and, you know, it's so different from anything that we've seen before in Star Trek that it really does kind of like help to get, you know, even little sparse details about his past that kind of help to paint the picture of Saru, which is definitely cool. I suppose the other big thing which is in the book, which, you know, really kind of helps in terms of placing things in their proper context, is the whole subplot of Burnham and Spock and their relationship and all that good stuff. What did you think about that?
I enjoyed that. I mean, I have to say I felt that there's quite a long section of the book where they're basically just solving all these puzzles together. And it did feel that was the aspect of the book I think I enjoyed the least. I don't know if you've ever seen, there's a show we had over here called The Crystal Maze, where basically these teams of people go into these kind of games and they have to win crystals. It's like a fancy game show, but it reminded me very much of that. It was like, okay, so they've got to solve this maths problem together and it's very difficult and they're going to get killed if they don't manage it. And then they go into the next room and they have to solve some kind of musical problem together, and if they don't manage it. And really all of this, which goes on for quite a long time, and I have to say I found slightly boring, is just to get us to the point where to solve the final problem. And that I thought was the most interesting section of the book, really. And there's all this kind of interesting stuff about Spock's relationship with his parents, Spock's relationship with Amanda. So there's whole interesting levels of kind of, I guess, all that kind of Vulcan repressed emotion and, you know, everything that you think about Spock's family relationship and how kind of screwed up it is. In some ways, adding this new character into the mix, it only complicates it further, and it only, you know, but in some ways, to be fair, he manages to tie those things together, I think, quite well, so that it does actually seem to make kind of emotional sense, rather than just feeling like she's kind of been pasted in like Cybok, like some character, because that was the real issue, I think, with Burnham having this relationship with Sarek, was you know, it's just like Spock has these kind of endless siblings that he never talks about and that have no impact on the story, but kind of crop up now and then. I feel like he did sort of at least make some kind of sense of their relationships, and even if because there's an age difference, I think, so they weren't kind of necessarily around each other very much, but by introducing these elements of kind of envy and rivalry and you know, one trying to live up to the other and both trying to impress Sarek in different ways and so on, it kind of formed a kind of strong connection between those characters, but in such a way that it doesn't necessarily seem ridiculous that we'd never heard of her before.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you in terms of the structure of this story and everything like that. And the thing that it kept on reminding me of was Move Along Home, which is not. I mean, I actually like Move Along Home quite a bit, but you know, but you're right. When they get to, you know, sort of like the climax of that story, like it does kind of turn and become something else entirely. And I mean, the thing that I kept on thinking of was a thing that always stands out to me, which is the Dr. Manhattan sequence from Watchmen, the movie, where you're kind of like going through this movie and it's sort of, you know, paint by numbers in terms of superhero stuff. And you're like, why are they turning this perfect comic book into a film and everything? And then you get to that scene and you're like, oh my God, this is like the most amazing, like 15 minutes of cinema I've ever seen in my life, you know? And that's kind of how I felt about, you know, the climax of that story between Burnham and Spock, you know, and it really did give a lot of insight, not just to Burnham, but also I think to Spock, and really kind of reconciled the quote unquote problem of introducing a sibling for Spock, and also helped to clarify some things that we see in the first couple episodes of Discovery in terms of like what exactly happened with Burnham's past and everything, and what her relationship with Sarek is. So I definitely thought that was cool. And, you know, even if the rest of the book was no good, which it is good, but even if it was no good,
it's kind of enjoyable, but it's not it doesn't feel like a significant moment, really, this story. Do you know what I mean? It is like could be one of several hundred in the Shenzhou series that we never got to see, But.
Exactly. But it's kind of like all worth the price of admission just for, that the Spock Burnham sequence, which comes towards the end. So, I definitely think you're right that, it does feel like an adventure of the Shenzhou, and I feel like this is something that they could definitely exploit, whether it's an animated series or a comic book. Especially since they're trying to find the cracks in the story and fill those in. I would be shocked if we don't see a Shenzhou ongoing comic book series, at some point in the not too distant future, maybe after season 1 ends, when you can really flesh out that story and tell, those adventures in a way which isn't going to really ruin anything that they're doing on the show. And really sort of enhance the backstory of it, which is, I think, what these things are trying to do, and what I think this does pretty well.
Definitely.
So, okay. Well, any final thoughts on Desperate Hours?
I enjoyed it a lot more than I think the last Star Trek tie-in novel that I read was Diane Carey's novelization of Broken Bow, which I suppose is not quite fulfilling the same thing because it wasn't a prequel, it was a novelization of the pilot. But that was quite a fascinating book because she obviously absolutely despised the show that she'd been asked to novelize, and it kind of reads through in every line is this kind of contempt for this show that's obviously not her Star Trek as far as she's concerned, and even to the extent of throwing in these kind of digs at certain scenes, there's this scene with the kind of butterfly striptease act or something, and she sort of goes off on this kind of editorializing about how puerile and ridiculous it is. But anyway, I felt like compared to that, this seemed to be someone who was absolutely coming on board with this new series, who, as you said, had been talking to the writers of the series. I know he's had quite a bit of involvement with them in terms of reading the scripts and kind of knowing where the series is going and who these characters are, and kind of, working together like that. And it definitely felt like something that adds something to this opening where, even 3 episodes in, we're kind of still not 100% sure what this series is that we're getting. And this at least gives us something quite familiar and something quite relatable. And I suppose a kind of, something to kind of latch onto in a way that ties Discovery into the kind of broader Star Trek universe.
Yeah, definitely. I think that it was definitely enjoyable. I think that it does work as its own kind of standalone story, and it's definitely something which you could read without watching the show at all. But I think it helps if you watch the first 2 episodes first. I also think it helps if you were to read the book before, going with episode 3. But regardless, I think that it's pretty cool. And I think that it definitely adds to what we've seen and will definitely inform how I view the show going forward, which is ideally what you're trying to do, hopefully in a positive way. So I would definitely recommend it. And again, if you want a much more in-depth conversation with David Mack himself, head on over to Literary Treks this weekend and check out episode number 206 of that show, where they will cover this book in great detail. So, yeah. All right. Well, thanks for joining me, Duncan. I'm actually going to cut out right now, but I'm going to hand you off to the very capable hands of Brandon and Amy, where you guys, along with Lee, can discuss episode 3 of Star Trek Discovery, Context is for Kings.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. We appreciate that wonderful introduction, and we will take it from here. So you go and you do your thing, and we'll be fine over here on the edge. This is Brandon-Shea Mutala, and joining me to discuss the episode Context is for Kings, I've got Amy Nelson. How are you doing, Amy?
I'm doing great. So excited to be talking Discovery again.
Yes, because you haven't been doing enough of that lately.
No, I haven't been.
Also joining us today is the long-lost Lee Hutchison. How are you doing, Lee?
Yeah, not too bad. I figured if you've got a British actor playing a British captain, that I should come onto the show. So I might put on an American accent just to fit in.
I want to hear your American accent. Can you do it?
Well, it depends on which region you want me to do. I'll maybe do Fargo or, something like that.
Duncan, thanks for sticking around. We appreciate it. I know that it's late where you guys are. It's well past midnight, your local time over there, and it's only 5 p.m. here. So I appreciate
Lucky
it, guys.
you. Yeah, Lee and I are burning the midnight oil on this one.
Yes.
We're all cuddled up in our little matching Trek FM pajamas.
Oh, well, I wish. I was just explaining before we started recording. The place I'm staying, the Wi-Fi's gone down, so I'm actually in the car around the corner, hijacking the neighbour's Wi-Fi.
Apparently, Wi-Fi passwords are less complicated overseas.
Well, I'm staying in the middle of nowhere in the countryside, so people are a bit more trusting around these ways.
Clearly in the wrong with their trust.
Yeah. You never know who might be using it or what for.
Sounds like you've got your secret Section 31 operation going on there. We're glad to have you.
It is, yeah. My Black Ops.
Well, we're going to be talking about Episode 3 of Star Trek Discovery, which has just aired on Sunday night on CBS All Access and Monday everywhere else in the world. And I'm going to start by saying that's more like it. So right off the top, I'm going to say that, but we'll get your guys' opinions as we go through. So, Amy, do you want to give us a quick little plot summary of the episode?
Well, sure. So Michael Burnham is getting transported to fulfill her sentence, and the shuttle gets diverted, and there's some energy people or things, and Discovery comes to save the day. So they're on the ship, and basically Captain Lorca calls for Burnham and says, "You are going to work for me." And so hijinks ensue. How about that?
Sounds good. Yeah, they get some spookiness going on here. Is it just me, or did this not feel like Empok Nor and Impulse? What do you think there, Duncan?
Definitely, absolutely. Which was a bit of a surprise coming so early on, I think, in this season. And really, I mean, this is kind of this, well, I was going to say third pilot. This is our kind of sort of reset pilot in a way. I was expecting something a little bit more traditional, maybe. I mean, it's interesting you say this is more like it. I feel like I liked both, but this was weird to me. This was a weird episode. This was not what I was expecting at all. This was kind of off the deep end. So, yeah, in the way that those episodes are, I suppose, those are kind of really, sort of pushing the Star Trek formula a bit in a real kind of, horror direction, which is not at all what I was expecting Discovery to be doing, in its kind of third episode in.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, I wasn't... I think there's a lot being made of the kind of the expedition to the sister ship and kind of the aliens and Impulse kind of vibe people are getting. But I was rewatching it just before coming on here, and I was like, it's only like an almost like less than kind of probably about 8-10 minute part of like a 50-minute episode. It just feels like a sort of just little kind of wee little side mission, and then it's back to the main kind of beef of the episode. That when I think about this episode, I don't really think of it as this kind of horror episode or this spooky episode that's kind of retreading something. I think it's more of the like meeting these new crew members and sort of the mystery of Discovery, and that it's really embracing the lower decks vibe. And I think when I've thought about this episode in the 2 times I watched, I'm not thinking, oh, this is the horror episode. I'm thinking, oh, it's this brilliant character drama that's got a little bit of horror in it.
But I guess it's not just there's the horror on the sister ship, which is like really gruesome and kind of, feels like, I don't know, Aliens or Event Horizon or something. But there's also all the stuff on Discovery it's not horror, but there's a lot of suspense. It's very creepy. Like the music is quite creepy. There's this real sense of, what the hell is this ship? Who are these people? With the exception of Tilly, and even Tilly is quite rude at one point. Everyone that Michael Burnham meets there is kind of unpleasant, unhappy. It's a really uncomfortable place. It's so different, I suppose, from, even with Deep Space Nine. I mean, the start of Deep Space Nine, okay, they were in this station. It was a bit of a kind of rusty pile of junk or whatever. There were some issues about the station itself, but with Discovery, there's this kind of feeling like these people are trapped there. You know, Stamets clearly hates the captain. There's a lot of kind of, you know, it's a nasty place. It's not where anyone would want to be. It's kind of, it's a very different vibe, I think, you know, to the whole show, not just that, freaky impulse. What was the other one? Empok Nor style interlude.
See, I had tweeted yesterday, Monday night when I watched this show, I'm like, oh man, crazy theory. What if Discovery actually takes place in the mirror universe? And I was thinking that because, you know, all these characters are acting in a very odd way, in an odd manner, and there's a very, you know, tense, aggressive atmosphere that's going on the ship. Even with, you know, like you said, with Tilly and the way she reacted when Burnham came beside her in engineering there. And then, you know, I'm fine with it. John Van Sitters tweeted back to me. He's like, yeah, if only in the mirror universe they called it, instead of the Federation, they called it the Terran Empire or something. And I'm like, shot down by John Van Sitters. I'm okay with that. But and I wasn't thinking that as like justification for, hey, I want this to fit in some other kind of continuity from my primetime continuity. I just think it's with TV nowadays, we're always expecting that twist in TV nowadays, that we're always trying to guess what's the story going to be. And even this episode here leaves a lot of questions open, and as viewers, it leaves us to guess. So, I mean, that's where my initial thought went, is what if this was a mirror universe? Which, we had heard rumors that there possibly may be mirror universe episodes this season. But what do you guys think about that? So here we are now with this new pilot, basically. You know, we've basically rebooted the show. Do you think that this may have worked as the actual pilot for the show? And had we been given the information that we got in the first 2 episodes as flashback throughout the season?
No, I think like it's the joy of the kind of the way they can go about it, that it's like you had the kind of it's like a prologue, and it almost felt like sort of the Battlestar Galactica kind of model in a way, that they had the sort of mini series start, and then like they dived into the next episode, which was quite a fast, intense one, and we got kind of to see a bit of the crew and see them under pressure, and then building from there. And I think like this is in a way kind of kickstarts what the show promised it was going to be about. That if we saw it as like this idea that Commander Burnham is like, you know, the second in command on the Shenzhou, that's kind of close to what we've kind of had before. But the idea was always going to be, it was going to be a sort of lower decks character. And you're saying like the viewers are thinking it's all a big mystery, like what's kind of going on here? Where's this all going? Like if we had it like the pilot in terms of how close she is to the captain and the mission, like it wouldn't be a mystery. So what's a mystery to us as the viewers is what's a mystery to Michael, because we're seeing everything through her eyes, and what's hidden behind those doors, what motives are hidden, they're hidden from her as well. And that kind of makes it exciting to have a Star Trek main character where we don't know where things are going, and I think that makes for a pretty exciting pilot for what they promised.
I think we kind of needed to see her in those first 2 episodes to get to know her a bit as a character. I mean, you know, really in those first 2 episodes, the only characters that have carried over are her and Saru. And we don't still know a lot about Saru, but, you know, we have spent a lot of time with Michael Burnham. We've seen quite a lot of different aspects of her personality. And I think that's quite important going into this 3rd episode, because if you just skip those 2 and started here, she spends the first half of this episode in a very kind of sullen, sulky mood. You know, she doesn't come across as a likable character. And obviously it's understandable, you know, we know what she's been through, we know what her situation is. But at the same time, I think that we kind of needed to see her in her element as a first officer, to kind of know who this person is before she gets everything sort of ripped away and her, you know, her career thrown down the pan and you know, all her sort of reputation ruined and everything. For that to mean something, you know, we had to kind of get to know her before that, so that we sort of knew who this person was when they were going through that whole experience. So I do kind of feel like it would have, I mean, this would have been an even more weird way of starting a new show if we hadn't seen anything beforehand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you guys. I don't think this one, if we had just started there, because I see episodes 1 and 2, you see that it's sort of more of this typical Starfleet and ideal of everyone trusts Michael Burnham. I mean, especially Captain Philippa and, Saru, and they're listening to her. And so you're in this safe place with Michael Burnham. And then you see it juxtaposed with her on the Discovery, where she doesn't know who she can trust. No one trusts her. So to see that difference, I think really makes episode 3. And I don't think episode 3 would be as good if we hadn't seen 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting, because so far there's been a lot of popularity on this third episode, and people really seem to have latched onto this one. So that's why I'm asking, would this have worked as a pilot with 1 and 2 being flashbacks throughout the season? Because again, like as I was leaving work today, somebody said, 1 and 2, I was kind of like, but when I got to episode 3, I was really on board with it. Somebody approached me at work and said that. But we get a lot of interesting development in this as well. And I think one of the most fascinating interactions that we get in this episode that I want to talk about is between Michael Burnham and Saru. And, as I said in the last episode, how I didn't feel in any way, shape, or form that these people had been working together for 7 years at that point. I really felt the tension between Saru and Burnham in this episode, in that a tragedy had occurred and these people were like on opposite sides of this tragedy, and there was tension between them as they were discussing, what was going on. However, this respect for each other as an officer was still there. So I felt this was a completely believable interaction as opposed to what I saw in the first 2 episodes. What do you guys think of that? Lee?
I think so to an extent. Like it is really hard because I felt like there'd been a kind of period of time, but like you're only seeing sort of a snapshot in time in a way that in that first episode that, some of these people have known each other for 7 years. Well, the captain and Michael had, but like, I don't know how long Saru had. Oh yeah, he was on the ship. Yeah. But like, you only get a snapshot of time, and it's an under pressure moment. You're not getting to show those little moments where perhaps that you've kind of known each other for 7 years and you're reminiscing perhaps about kind of a funny old story. Like, I think over the period of time, I think we'll probably see flashbacks to that 7 years. I think that will happen. But you can start to buy into their past history because they're not so much under pressure in these situations where they're talking in the corridor or the canteen. Mm-hmm. And I think that allows more moments to be human as opposed to kind of be stressed at each other.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the things that Mike and I were talking about earlier, speaking about the Desperate Hours novel, is that I think with Saru and Burnham in those first couple of episodes, you tend to... their sort of sparring is quite comic. Whereas I think if, looking at that novel, they actually... There is a real genuine antagonism between them, even before all the stuff that happens and the fallout that we're looking at in this episode. Because what we find out in that novel is that Saru's basically been passed over for promotion because Burnham's been promoted ahead of him. And so there's a real kind of resentment there. So as much as they do clearly both respect each other, I think that kind of antagonistic relationship is not just sort of friendly sparring. There is actually something... there is a kind of a serious competition between them underneath that. And then by the time we get to this third episode, he's sort of holding all the cards. He's been promoted. He's been made first officer. She's, down in the dirt, basically. And, I mean, one of the things I'm quite interested to see is sort of what's his journey going forward? Because he has that line, doesn't he, where he says, I'm not going to make the mistake that you made. I'm going to protect my captain the way you didn't protect yours. Now, his captain, we've seen by the end of this episode, is a seriously scary guy. So, is Saru so loyal to Lorca already that he, is totally signed up with him? Does he not kind of realise what he's let himself in for? I mean, he seems quite in awe of Lorca. He said he's not scared of things that other people are scared of. And of course, we know that Saru is scared of everything. In a sense, that's his kind of species-defining trait, is this kind of, crippling anxiety, really. So that's a relationship that I'm kind of interested in seeing where that goes, because at the moment Saru is inclined to trust Lorca and to distrust Burnham, and at some point along the line it seems pretty clear there's going to be a kind of conflict between those two positions, and in some ways he could be in the middle of it. He could be the one that she has to kind of pull back to the good side in a way.
Mm-hmm. Amy, what do you think?
Well, one thing I noticed with Saru and Burnham that was different than in episodes 1 and 2, like, it seemed like Saru was way more logical than Burnham was. And so in episodes 1 and 2, it's like I saw Burnham's logic side just really come out, and here's Saru like, yeah, they were sparring, and, you know, I felt that they had a good relationship and a little back and forth. And then now in episode 3, like, it seemed like Michael Burnham, her logic wasn't even close to what Saru was doing. And Saru was just straight, matter of fact, you know, I'm not mad at you. Like, you know, when Lorca was like, well, Saru, who do you tell me about Michael Burnham? And he's like, well, she's the smartest, you know, officer that I know. And like, he wasn't holding a grudge against her or anything. Like, he was very matter of fact, straight as, talk to her, just the facts, ma'am. And so that really played for me and made me sort of wonder, like, well, Michael Burnham here, she's much more human in this episode. And so to see that relationship and how that plays off of each other, I think is going to be interesting.
Yeah, I like that. Saru's still my favorite character in the show, and, you know, this episode really does it for me. Like, just his physicality as an actor, you know. I don't know if it's direction or if it's him, I'm not sure. I'm leaning towards Doug Jones right now, but the way that he moves his arms and stuff, like when he's holding that can of blueberries, or that bowl of blueberries, and he motions with his hand for her to enter engineering and then just walks away. Like, just the way that he's physical. I just love watching him move. You know, like, he's just amazing to watch. The next character I want to talk about is Silly Tilly. So, what do you guys think of Silly Tilly, right? I'm going to call her Silly Tilly because her name's Sylvia, right? So Silly Tilly works for me. Amy, what do you think of Silly Tilly, a.k.a. Barkley 2, maybe?
Thank you very much. Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking. And, you know, the nervous, talks a lot, and, you know, just total Reginald Barkley. Saw the connection because I love TNG. And I think that she still has a question mark around her, and like, where are her loyalties? Because you know that she wants to have a friend and this roommate and all the fun, but there's a little something like she sort of lies to her a couple times, you know? And I was like, why are you lying to her? What is that? So I don't think she's all, you know, just this happy-go-lucky. Like, there's something underlying in her character that I think we're going to see. Because why, you know, oh, well, these science stations, they're assigned. Well, no, they're not. Oh, I thought I was going to have no roommates because of these reasons. Ha, ha, ha. You know, but then to her face, you know, it's like, oh, I'm looking for advice and because I'm going to be captain one day and stuff like that. So I don't know. I'm feeling a little duplicity from her, but I really like her. I think she's very relatable. I think many people can relate to her because when you know, I just think in new situations, some people do get that nervous. And so I can see people really liking her.
Mm-hmm. Lee?
I've mentioned before, and kind of like Earl Grey, like, I work in mental health recruitment. I help like people that kind of have autism or mental health difficulties, brain injuries, disabilities, all types of people that struggle to find work or build up their confidence or achieve their goals. And Tilly is someone I see numerous times a day in my kind of line of work. I work for people. I work to kind of help people like that. And I found her incredibly kind of relatable to, you know, the type of people that I'm always kind of rooting for. And I think that is such a clever step. Like, for me, the character traits that I see, and I'm not saying that this is what she has, because, like, you know, that's for further down the line probably. But, like, I see a lot of kind of Asperger's traits. Like, the idea that she has, like, her bed, and she has, like, you know, she doesn't want someone perhaps in her space. Mm-hmm. Like, those would be traits that I would associate with someone with Asperger's, that, you know, having their own space, you know, a set way of doing things, a routine. And those things I saw and I was like, this is brilliant. And like, when she went like, on like whatever year's time, I'm going to be captain. Like, I work with people that have studied, you know, university master's degrees and have worked all their lives, and they come to me and they'll go, my goal is to achieve this type of job. How can we get there? What can we do? And like, when I went into work after watching this episode, because thankfully my office is only like 15 minutes away, and we kind of work on a flexi time system, so I can watch Star Trek Discovery, then start my work. So I went into work, and then like during the day, like kind of had some people come into our office, kind of doing some sessions, and I was like, oh, and then just in my head I was like, that person just reminds me of Tilly. You know, we're looking at, you know, we've got this black commander, we've got all these different characters. This is another minority that is cleverly represented in Star Trek. And yes, they say, oh, I've got kind of some mental health issues or disability. I can't remember the line. But this is someone that is pretty spot on. And it's brilliant work from Whitman to bring something like this to life so well.
Agreed.
Before we jump over to Duncan there about Tilly, I just want to ask you a question, Lee. So the one thing that I felt a little bit odd about Tilly, and it's not necessarily her, and it might not necessarily, it might just be the writing, is why does she have a room to herself? She's a cadet. Like, this is a very large room. Do you buy the excuse where she says 100%, it's because of my 100%. Special needs?
I would call that, there's a thing that we call in my career, and we call it reasonable adjustments. And what reasonable adjustments are is that for every job, people with a disability are entitled to certain adjustments. Mm-hmm. Now, that could be something when people go for an interview, for example. People with disabilities are entitled to get the questions ahead of time. That's not to give them an advantage over anyone, it's to try and make things fair. And part of my job when people start their work is sometimes the hardest thing for someone is to get into work, but sometimes for others, the hardest thing is keeping work. And that could be sometimes making an adjustment in their workplace where they have a certain bit of technology or they have a certain space that they could go to if they're feeling overwhelmed sensory-wise. And the idea of her having perhaps her own room is something that if I had someone come into me and I was in the 22nd century, whatever, doing this job, and someone went, I want to be in Starfleet, but I find it overwhelming living perhaps with other people. Is it possible that I could have my own room? That would be something I could go, yeah, that would be a reasonable adjustment, and that would be something that could perhaps help someone into like Starfleet and feel settled, not have the overwhelming sensory issues, and will feel comfortable and have their own space. So yeah, like little touches like that, I thought by default or design, were spot on.
See, I'll have to watch again because I didn't get the impression that she asked or wanted to have a room to herself. I got the impression that they gave her a room to herself because of her special needs, because she's like, I was, having a roommate is a built-in friend.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I thought that as well, and I think what that probably would have come down to if this exists in Starfleet, because it's bound to be, would probably be an occupational health. So occupational health is where people do like a workplace assessment and go, hey, this is something that you maybe need to consider as part of your health, or, this is something that you should maybe err against, or this is something you should perhaps do that will help you. And that could be something that would be put down that I think this is something that would perhaps help you for now settle into this new ship. As I say, it's relatively new. So, yeah, I think it's a pretty spot-on interpretation of how someone perhaps with a disability like that would kind of find themselves on a starship. And I think it's excellently well done.
Well, over here in America, it's called accommodations, and they do have that. And that's why I think, Brandon, you bring up that point. It's like, I think there's something going on, because I would believe, because I have seen, people with accommodations that get jobs, and so those are their accommodations that they get. And so I think that she probably knows this, and I think that she has requested it because of her allergies. And then to have this roommate, she might be trying to cover it up.
Special needs, right? She does directly say the term special needs, which I like as well, right? Sorry to interrupt there, though, which is what I think is fascinating about it.
Yeah, and so is she trying to cover it up by just saying, oh, but now I have an instant friend? Like, what really is the truth? I think that is something to look at. That's why I'm not quite on board with trusting her 100%.
I want to get to Duncan. I'm sorry to keep interrupting Duncan here, but I don't sense any duplicity whatsoever from Tilly. I think Tilly,
what you see is what you get with her.
Yeah, I think she is the most legit character on this show. And I think she is actually that positive. I think that she actually has these issues, and I buy her awkwardness that she has when she says, I'm sorry that I said it was an assigned seating, but I need to be presented as this type of person, and I felt having you there would have affected that. But she feels bad about it. But she's, so I personally don't sense an ounce or a shred of duplicity from Tilly at all. Myself. So, Duncan, sorry for keep stepping on your toes.
That's okay.
There.
No, don't worry. I don't either. But Amy just really freaked me out saying that because I sort of thought I love this character, and I felt like she is by far the most likable person that we meet in that episode. You know, it's this really nasty ship full of difficult, miserable people, and she's this kind of sunny ball of joy, basically. I mean, I sort of started worrying when she was saying she wanted to make captain one day. I was sort of thinking, well, we've already, seen this as a show that is kind of selling itself on not being afraid to kill people off, not being afraid to have nasty things happen to people. I sort of started thinking, oh no, is she, maybe she's going to meet a nasty end at some point. But it didn't cross my mind that she might be actually, playing Burnham. But I suppose that would, I can sort of see where Amy's coming from with that, just because that would seem to fit into the whole sort of feel of this show that we're getting. That everyone on this ship is up to something, and it did. The one big question I did have about her is she's this lovely, sweet, sunny, personality. What is she doing on this ship where everyone seems to be involved in something kind of shady and it's all a bit top secret and all a bit mysterious? And there's that kind of, when they have the black alert scene and she sort of rolls over on her bed and kind of looks as if she's going to kind of pretend to be asleep so that she doesn't, when I first saw it, I felt like it's almost like she's kind of shutting out what's going on around her. Do you know what I mean? Like, because she knows there's something sinister and something wrong about it. But I did just sort of start thinking, well, why has she ended up on this ship? Is she the right person for that job? Or, or is there something more to her? I mean, maybe she's a complete genius at whatever it is, and that's why she's been selected for that job. But I don't really get the feeling that anyone is on that ship by accident necessarily. Do you know what I mean? Because we've seen the lengths that Lorca will go to get Burnham there, including seemingly killing the woman who was piloting the shuttle she was on. I don't know. That was the main kind of lingering question for me about her: is what is she actually doing there? Is it just a coincidence that she's, landed the worst job in Starfleet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm going to be very disappointed if we find out that Tilly's got some agenda. Like, I don't know, because it seems like in TV nowadays everybody has to have their own agenda in characters, and I like this. What I see so far is I like this legit character. She's happy. She's positive. She's awkward. She's a person. I really, really love this character, and I think she did a really good job. Lee, you told me the actress's name was...
oh my god, the word, like, can I use that? It's quite early in the morning.
Sorry.
The name's escaped me. Let me get this loaded.
We'll get back to it, but I want to say one thing though. Burnham is cold.
Mary Wiseman.
There we go. Burnham is cold because you guys realize that she totally did that. She swapped pillows with her to get her saliva, hey? Right? Because Tilly's like, I'm allergic to this type of pillow. You're in my bed. I realize they look the same, but they're different. She said that for a reason. So clearly we didn't see it on screen, but Burnham swapped pillows that look the same in order to get Tilly to snore so that she could steal her saliva later on. That's awesome.
I sort of assumed it was that her allergies were partly a kind of mental thing. Do you know what I mean? That it wasn't really, or that what we were saying earlier, that really that was another lie, in the same way as the lie about saying they had assigned seats, that really it was just, okay, that was her bunk and she didn't want someone in her space, and so she came up with this story. I mean, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I kind of assumed that it slightly disproved what she'd said earlier.
Oh, see, I don't sense any duplicity from Tilly at all. Like, yes, she said that thing in there, but again, it wasn't meant to be duplicitous because she talked about it later on. So I buy the allergy, and that's what I think Burnham did. I think Burnham switched the pillows.
Wow.
So that's my thought on it anyways.
Oh, she knows what she's doing.
So let's get to Lorca. Let's talk about the big bad elephant in the room here. So what do you guys think? Good Merle or bad Merle? I can't make it into a good Piton, bad Piton? I don't know. Bapton? So, Duncan, what do you think? Is this guy going to be good? Is he bad?
He seems pretty bad to me. I always thought, as soon as they cast Jason Isaacs, I thought, well, we can see where that's going. I mean, and especially with this idea of focusing on a character who's not the captain, it kind of sets up that the captain is going to be in some kind of conflict with that character. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I will be surprised if further down the line in this series we don't get a second mutiny, this time against Jason Isaacs. That's my prediction, is that's where the story's going. But
I've heard
in any
that
case,
before.
Ooh, I like that. I haven't heard that yet. Nice.
Well, we'll see. We'll wait for a few weeks and see. But either way, I loved him. I thought it was a great character. I actually really liked the American accent. I liked the fact that, they cast this English guy to play this quite sinister, villainous role. He's played so many of these kind of villainous English roles. I think it was quite a good choice in a way not to do. I saw an interview. He was saying basically he didn't want to be the kind of sort of wannabe Patrick Stewart, basically, kind of the other English captain, but nasty. So he decided
French
to do
captain,
the accent.
surely.
Well, yeah. Well, who knows? Maybe Lorca's meant to be Spanish. I don't know, but I think it worked really well, and I think it partly also it worked because it gave him, although he's really sinister and seems quite evil and slightly mad, he is very charming. That kind of that accent, I think it gives him a kind of charm and a kind of easy disposition that sort of helps make him not completely the cartoon villain that otherwise he's sort of in danger of skirting towards. But I really liked him. I thought it was a fantastic performance, and he's an interesting character. And it's not to say, I mean, just because I think he's bad and he's ruthless and everything, his goals are to win this war. He's kind of, I think it's a question like, how far are you willing to go? He's not, I don't think he's, an enemy agent or something. He's kind of on the right side, but his methods are going to be a bit dubious.
See, for me, I think it's going to kind of... My view of this is like, and there's been some criticism on the Babel conference and here and there, that this is like, and we've mentioned as well, this is a pretty grim ship in terms of the attitudes, that this isn't kind of some of the cheerful Star Trek that we've come to know. And yes, it is wartime, but I like that they've gone from the pivot that we saw it in Deep Space Nine, at times The Next Generation, Voyager, Enterprise, that we've all had these captains that have largely been very kind of good people, kind of the heart's in the right place, always caring, and they do things, to achieve their goals when kind of it's wartime or difficulties. We've seen it with Kirk, we saw it with Archer in season 3, we saw it with Sisko throughout the Dominion War. These people can go bad, and I like the idea that in a way it is like a proper prequel, in a way, like to the Star Trek that we know, the original series and so on, that we're starting at a point of, we've maybe got a captain and we've got a crew that are quite negative. How do we get them from there to here? How do we get them to become hopeful again? How do we get them to, embrace that Starfleet ethos? And I think that there will be a lot more rough roads to go with Lorca, but I think that his ultimate destiny will be something perhaps resembling a Captain Picard or a Captain Kirk, something along those lines. Mm-hmm. And I read a brilliant thing with I think Jason Isaacs had spoke to the media, and I think it was almost have been embargoed until Monday. And I read a brilliant thing with him where he was like, he has this, like, he's playing him quite close to William Shatner in the respect that he works with a lot of female officers, and he wants there to be sort of that little subtext between nearly every female, apart from kind of Burnham, and I'd imagine with Tilly as well, that there's something perhaps going on with them, that he's got maybe his eye for the ladies, and I think we get that in the kind of final scene as well. So I think there's going to be a lot of kind of rough roads ahead, but I ultimately think it will be a positive one in the end. Maybe that's just the hopeful guy in me.
Amy, what do you think of Lorca?
I found myself on a roller coaster ride with him, because I think your natural instinct is to, okay, I'm going to trust the captain, right? That's what we've done in all the other iterations of Star Trek, and we're just going to trust him. So my first instinct was to trust him. But then I was just going through, like, I don't know if he's really devious, but 100% he is calculated. Every move that he makes has been thought out, 10 before. If I'm going to do this, this is going to happen. If I'm going to do this, like, Burnham comes in, his back is to her and he's talking to her. Like, that is such like a power move, and he's setting himself up. I'm the captain. This is it. Oh, you're going to do what I want. There's no free rides on this ship. Oh, you're going to stay because I'm going to use you. Like, it seems so calculated, manipulated, and power. But then it's like, then he goes and shows her the spores, and it's like, oh, so we can trust him because he's willing to open up. But then it's like, no, he's only sharing tidbits of information. Controlling what information goes out is such a power play. So I just was like, okay, I'm going to trust him. Oh, there's no way in hell I'm going to trust him. Oh, I can see maybe I'll trust him. Yeah, it was too back and forth, and I don't trust him at all.
I think he's one of those guys. He's like, if if your goals align with his, you can work. Do you know what I mean? If she's on board with what he wants, he's going to work with her. But as soon as someone comes up against that, we'll see what happens. But I wouldn't trust him for a second. I think it's interesting. You brought up that line. He says, "I'm going to use you," and I think that's quite a key. For me, that was one of the lines that really stood out for him. He was like, "You're on my ship. I'm going to use you." And that way of looking at other people. I mean, they talked about this on Metatrex, I think, some time ago. Like the idea of, seeing people as a means to an end rather than an end in themselves. And that's very much the vibe I got off him. And Stamets says the same thing, basically, that he's taken him and he's taken his work and his career and he's kind of used it for his own ends. He's sort of perverted it in a sense for what he wants to get out of it. And he definitely seems like someone who, he knows what he wants and he just thinks that everyone else is there to kind of fit in with his plan. And obviously he's the captain. To some extent that is what the captain has to do, but I think there's definitely something more going on here, and also, as you say, more sort of manipulative and kind of playing games maybe to a certain extent with people than we've seen before.
See, I think you used a very good word there, Amy, in calculating, and I think he miscalculated with Burnham. Like, I don't think he's mad, insane, crazy in any way. I think he's very calculating. He has a goal in mind, but he miscalculated with Burnham. And I think that the reason he showed Burnham what these spores can do is because he had to recalculate, and I don't think he had Burnham accepted right away and responded to him the way he thought she was going to respond. Okay, you're a mutineer and you need to get back in Starfleet. He wouldn't have shown her that stuff right away, but he had to recalculate. Okay, so she's not the kind of person I thought she was. She's going to go for science. Let's show her what this is. Okay, and I think because he showed her that, had she decided to go back on the prison ship, like already I think that the 3 people in that prison ship, I don't think they made it to their final destination alive. Right? I think they're gone, and I think Burnham would have been gone too had she decided to not stick with him. So he had to recalculate by showing her what it was.
Especially when you've got, what is it, they said 300 odd different experiments going on at one time. Like, if you turn around and went, I think you want me on the ship to tell you about how to create a new way to fly. Oh, is that what you think, is it? Come with me. And then they transport to like a cotton candy machine room, or like there's so many different options you could do. No, we're actually here to see you how we can do a new microwavable rice or something like that. Like there's so many different ways that you could have gone.
My real name is Captain Wonka, and we're here making never-ending gobstoppers and ice cream that doesn't melt in the sun. But I think he's a good character, and the last character that we need to talk about is Stamets. And right now, I hate Stamets. I hate him.
I agree with you, Brandon. This is a first.
But it's good. It's not like I hate him that I don't like the character. I hate him like I hate Win, where you just love to hate him, right? Because he's doing such a good job as an actor, and I'm sure that we're going to get to know this guy more, and he'll become a more likable character. But I'm on the side of Burnham here, and watching Lorca, like, I hate lurkers. What do you want, lurker? Just the way that he's treating her. I understand why he's treating her that way. She's a mutineer, and people don't know the whole story, right? But I don't know. So I love to hate him right now. I think he's doing a really good job. So, if he's listening, then he knows that I love to hate him. So.
Nah, I'm digging him. Like, he is probably, and like, I think he is probably, we all talked about how kind of Tilly's quite real to life. I think Paul's quite real to life as well. That this is a scientist that was happily working away in his lab, working away with his best mate on a prize project, and now he's been dragged away essentially to work on military projects. He's kind of working under a bit of a whip, as it were. I think I'd be kind of making a bit of a kind of snarky remarks, or kind of like anything that's sort of, you know, even further that would annoy me, of like, oh my God, I'm not having a great time on the ship, and now I've got this mutineer to deal with. Oh, and he's just pushing these people away. Like, I think I would probably be like that if I was pulled out of my office and working on a military ship like that. And I think we'll see a lot more of him to come. I think he is every Star Trek fan that if they found themselves dumped on the Discovery, we wouldn't be Michael Burnham, we wouldn't be Tilly, we wouldn't be the captain, we would be this guy. Mark my words. And I've seen Babel Conference comments. He is very much relatable to a lot of Star Trek fans, I can tell you.
Duncan, what do you think of Stamets?
He was not at all what I was expecting, but I agree. I think as a character, he's great. As a person, he's
so pleasant on Twitter.
Bit of a jerk. Well, that's the other thing. I think it's like he's the guy who he's been tweeting constantly. He's been watching all these old Star Trek episodes. He's been really kind of respectful of the of the kind of stuff that's gone before, engaging with the fans and everything. He seems like such a nice guy. So I think that's the thing. Is I was kind of thinking, oh, he's going to be this, and we've heard all about his romance with the Doctor. Is it the Doctor, the guy he's going to be involved with? And I don't know, like so. I just sort of assumed he was going to be this really nice character, and then he turns out to be, a real jerk, basically. But I enjoyed that. I think it works. I think he plays, he definitely plays that part very well. And it's a kind of, I think I like the fact also that he's quite outspoken about the captain, because he's the one who really says what everyone's thinking, in a sense, in that there's something wrong with this guy, and he's just totally, opposed to his whole kind of methodology and his whole sort of approach to the situation. So, and I think that kind of definitely that adds something that otherwise is just a little bit obscure somehow in the episode. Okay,
so I want to interrupt and ask something about this. Do you think he's Starfleet, or do you think he was drafted, like because of his scientific experience? Because again, he is very opposed to his science being used this way, and he was content to be working with this friend of his. So I kind of get the vibe that, especially since he's so vocally opposed to Captain Lorca, I get the vibe that maybe he was drafted into Starfleet, because of the science that he has, and the military aspect of Starfleet brought him in and said, hey, you're working for us now.
I think he probably wasn't drafted as such, but if you're a scientist, where's all the investment going if you're kind of growing up and you wanted to really experiment with, space fungus, Starfleet? He was probably working in some sort of Starfleet lab on Regula 4 or 2 or whatever, and then it's just like tap on the shoulder, you're being transferred, and then he's now find himself on a starship, probably for the first time, and I that's my kind of feeling on where he's kind of come from and is going.
Interesting. Amy, what do you think of him? Anything else you want to add?
Well, yeah, I mean, isn't that similar to like the Genesis Project and the original movies? And it was private, and then Starfleet was sort of taking over that project. So I'm with you on that as well. I think that, yeah, him and his buddy were working and just going along, and then the damned war started, and they got sucked right in, and now they're on a starship doing their tests there and running their project from there. So I didn't feel his core was Starfleet. So I'm sort of with you. I feel like, maybe they were just your civilians doing their own thing and then got sucked in.
It made me think also, they've got these 300 other science experiments going on. I mean, there's something about that ship of the kind of Manhattan Project vibe. Do you know what I mean? Presumably all these brilliant scientists who've been brought from all over the Federation and brought to this ship and forced to do this work in these, quite kind of concentrated conditions, and for military ends that maybe they're not 100% signed up to. I don't know. I just thought that was kind of interesting. But I mean, it hadn't crossed my mind that he could have been drafted. But at the same time, he's another one where Tilly, I sort of got why she joined Starfleet. I didn't get why she had ended up on that ship. Stamets, I didn't really understand why he'd have joined Starfleet. Except I suppose I can sort of see that. Well, we know there are different routes in, right? Because Michael Burnham didn't go to Starfleet Academy. She was at the Vulcan Science, whatever, and then kind of got transferred. So there are obviously other ways of kind of ending up in Starfleet from a different kind of career path, other than the one that we typically see where, you kind of go off to college and become an officer and, do that whole kind of command route or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we got some great stuff here. We'll talk about one more thing before we sign off here. We got to talk about the most awesome thing in this episode, Black Alert.
I thought it was going to be about putting salt in tea.
Salt and tea, no, that's the second most awesome thing.
Well, the tribble.
Black Alert. Wow, I was like, what? This is cool. We've had red, yellow, we've had blue, so I'm okay with there being a Black Alert. So this Black Alert is the testing of this fungal warp drive, right? This fungal thing. So the first time that we get it, because he says, there was an accident while our sister ship was doing Black Alert drills, right? Mm. And he mentions to Burnham at the end of the episode, he says, you've experienced this warp, and all that you noticed was a little bit of water on the walls, right? So, and that's when Black Alert was. So Black Alert is them testing this crazy fungus warp drive. Insert mushroom joke here, right? But, what do you guys think of this idea of this fungal warp drive? What do you think of Black Alert? What do you think of this mystery that we're going to have to get some more information on? Amy?
Yeah. Yeah, go. Lee?
Yeah, I mean, who says Star Trek can't do anything new after 700 odd episodes? Yeah, I think it was the same when people saw the Black Com badge and then Black Alert. I think there's a difference. I've got a coworker that's watching Star Trek Discovery that's only watched the sort of J.J. Abrams movies. He's like, yeah, it's pretty enjoyable. What do you think of it? I was like, well, what do you make of the Com badges and Black Alert? And he's like, yeah, all right, I don't know. But it's little things like that pay off for all these fans that have stuck with it over the years. Black Alert, what could Black Alert be? Let's have a topic about it on a podcast, where for most folk it probably wouldn't register. So I'm pretty excited, and I think this idea of Black Alert and all these Manhattan projects, in a way, Star Trek can be something. It can almost be sort of like the Twilight Zone in a way, that you've got 300 odd different experiments going on at one time. It can be as wacky as you want it to be, really, and it can be as crazed, or it can be an experiment that kind of forces our character into a certain situation. That's pretty exciting. So I don't think it's just going to be Black Alert. I think we could maybe get some lilac alerts, or bright pink alerts. I think it could be quite exciting. I'm really excited to see what's behind those other doors.
I can't wait until we get Chartreuse Alert.
Well, personally, I was happy when we just had two kinds of alert, but whatever. I mean, I think all the black stuff is a bit obvious. I mean, the black badges, the black ops, the black alert. To me, it's a little bit on the nose and it's a little bit silly. But at the same time,
yeah. But is that a problem?
The concept of the show is surprisingly silly. I mean, this whole fungus warp drive thing is quite bizarre. I mean, it's a kind of a retread of the Voyager episode Equinox, where they were using those aliens to power their kind of transwarp or whatever it was. But that at least seemed. This is taking it to another more kind of fantastical level somehow. And I don't know, I was surprised at how out there this episode was in a lot of different ways. Because I suppose compared to the first two, which were quite, sort of solid kind of action adventure kind of, do you know what I mean? A bit of diplomacy, a bit of kind of all the kind of more sort of conventional Star Trek-y elements, I suppose. Whereas this was going into some kind of creepy, weird territory, definitely.
Yeah. Amy?
So the whole Black Alert, and I've read a lot of fan response, connection to Section 31. I'm sure everyone has seen that by now.
What?
But
I've never heard that theory yet.
Oh, well, listen to postcards that dropped yesterday. So it's interesting. I think they took technobabble and made it like biobabble. I mean, that was some pretty serious, awesome stuff that they were connecting biology and physics and stuff like that. But so these spores, do you think that they're in any way related? So we see that they're growing on the plants on Discovery, but then on the USS Glenn, we didn't really see if they were growing them. Like, how were they doing their test runs, right? And so why is it the only thing that they saved outside of information was the kitty from the USS Glenn? And like when Lorca went to tap the force field, like there was some of those spores inside with the kitty cage.
Well, they said, didn't they? There's a bit of dialogue where they said that the reason the Glenn was performing better than the Discovery was that they weren't growing their own spores; they were getting them from somewhere. So presumably that animal is connected to that in some way.
Yes.
And that's why he's brought it over. But I mean, I guess we'll find out how. But maybe
I
it makes
think
the
it was
spores
on
or it attracts
cheese.
the
They were
spores.
letting the cheese go rotten.
Right.
And I like it as well. Like, when I was watching the first time, I was like, huh. And I like that it was something a bit different. Because, like, this is the 6th Star Trek series. It's a prequel. And, like, the idea in this 3rd episode that, yeah, it's a bit silly as it stands at the moment, this kind of fungus and everything. But it's like, yeah, I'll go along with that. This is something different. I trust the guys. And I'm like, you know what? I'd rather it was something wacky and crazy like fungus mushrooms than it was just like, this is some sort of crystal that we found on some alien planet. And it's like, oh, I've seen this before. But like, this is something a bit different. And I'm quite happy to go along with that. That's fine for now. And I have a feeling that this isn't just going to be some sort of wacky thing of the week. Like, the fact that kind of Paul, the character, is like, this is his specialty. Like, I don't think you make a character have that kind of specific a specialty. Mention it before the show even comes out that this is a scientist that specializes in this. If this isn't going to be something that's going to be a thread through the season. So I'm very curious to see about Star Trek bringing fungus and serialized television together.
Mm-hmm. They tried to do it with Voyager, I suppose, with the bioneural gel packs. And that was like the big kind of technological shift with that show, wasn't it? But then I don't think they ever really went anywhere with it. Other than that,
no.
you know, they got infected or something once. But I mean, it was a kind of an element of the storyline they dropped pretty quickly because it didn't fit with the kind of, I don't know, with the kind of technobabble setup that they had. They obviously didn't really work out how to kind of integrate that or what kind of a difference it would make. But you know, it is interesting. I have to say, like, I enjoyed this episode a lot more the second time. Partly because some of the really weird out there stuff I found easier to cope with once I was expecting it, if you know what I mean. And the spores and everything were definitely in that category for me. The first time I was watching, I was just like, what is this show? Where are we going? You know, what on earth is happening?
Yeah. Well, before we go tonight, gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining us here. Before we go, I want everybody to have one prediction of what they think is going to happen. And here's my prediction. I think that Captain Lorca is going to save the day at the end of it all by cloning a whole bunch of tribbles and throwing them at the Klingons. And that'll be the great tribble hunt that we know about. And that's why he's got the tribbles. He's gonna learn what they can really do. So Lorca will save the day with the tribbles.
Little does he know, like, the solution to this war is sitting on his desk.
On his desk.
I joke, but like, it's true. Like, the solution to the war is right in front of him. It's right next to the magic cookies.
The fortune cookies. Lee, what's your crazy theory for the show? Or even a non-crazy theory, a normal theory.
I think this is. I genuinely don't know. I'm trying to keep myself in some sort of weird prism, and I'm just trying to think. Like, I'm not trying to read the theories too much, and I just want to sort of be surprised each week. And then when I get to the end of the first run, I'm going to just dive into all these theories. So I'm going to go really boring, like I'm going to sound like someone's aunt here. I just hope the theory is that everyone enjoys Star Trek Discovery and has a really good time talking about it online and their own homes, and that's going to be a success for everyone. That's my theory.
Duncan?
Well, I was actually wondering about that tribble on the desk. I was sort of thinking, we know they're doing all these weird experiments. Maybe they're the ones that actually start the tribbles off breeding like mad and causing trouble. Maybe before Discovery, the tribbles were a bit more manageable. Yeah, I don't know, really. I mean, I suppose one of the things I am both struggling with and enjoying about this series is not knowing where it's going, not knowing what to expect. I mean, I do find, watching Star Trek without spoilers is kind of a new experience. It's not just new because it's been off the air for so long and it's been in reruns and we've been rewatching these shows, but actually thinking back, in the 90s when I got into Star Trek, you could read, I watched most of DS9 and Voyager on, Lee will appreciate this, VHS tapes that you could buy the VHS tapes, but I would always have read the reviews in Star Trek Monthly magazine, several weeks before the VHS tapes arrived. So I knew, I didn't know everything that was going to happen, but I knew what each episode was about. Do you know what I mean? I knew the concept, I knew the kind of, rough shape of it and so on. Whereas with this show, we really, like I've said a few times, this episode was not what I was expecting at all. I tuned in and I was a bit bewildered by it. And with all three of the episodes I've seen so far, I've liked them better on a second viewing because I just think it's kind of hard to adjust to watching Star Trek for me and not knowing so little about where we're going with it or what's happening. So I think it's hard to say. I've said my sort of general prediction is that I think there's going to be some kind of conflict between Burnham and Lorca, and I suspect, I don't know, I don't think he's going to be a long-term character if this show runs to many seasons, whether that's because he has some kind of redemptive moment and sacrifices himself at the end, or whether that's because she, they come to blows and she offs him or what. But I'm definitely predicting some kind of major conflict going down the way. And I always sort of thought, going at a story where you weren't focusing on the captain as the hero, that a kind of mutiny storyline would be an interesting way to go. We know we've got Nicholas Meyer on board. We know how much he's interested in these kind of historical, literary antecedents. Moby Dick, for example, another novel about a ship with a dubious captain. That's kind of what I'm looking to see. But at the same time, I'm enjoying actually having no idea where this show's going or what it's going to be like. So, just be along for the ride.
Well, I was completely shocked with the 6-month time gap. Like going to jail at the end of the second episode and then like a reboot. I'm glad I knew nothing going into this. So, Amy, what do you think? Any thoughts as to where you think the show might go?
Totally out there, but I think this series we've been told is about Klingons is a load of crap, and I think they're going to switch it. It's totally my own opinion. But I think it's really about the Romulans. And so I'm going to say from when the first 2 episodes and the Klingon decloaked, it was all in green. And I mentioned that last week on The Edge. And I was like, why is it green? And we know Romulans are green. And then in this episode, when she was in the spores and Captain Lorca's like, don't blink because you'll miss Romulus. I was like, so that's 2 episodes now that I'm reading into it. Totally my reading into it. But I think Romulans are going to have a larger play in it.
Interesting. Fascinating. Well, listeners, stay tuned after our Previously on Trek FM spot because Amy and I are going to read some reviews and emails, but we're going to get Lee and Duncan off to bed because it's like, 3 a.m. or something like that, wherever they are.
I want that. I want that Star Trek Discovery bed sheets, though. I want that. So if someone can get that out in time, screw this AVOS £300 uniforms. Get me the bed sheets. That's something manageable and affordable, and I'm pretty sure my girlfriend will not approve, but it will be happening.
Well, I just hope you have hypoallergenic pillows so that you don't snore.
I'll try.
Lee, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Lee_Nostromo, at Star Trek VHS, and you can find me on the Filibuster podcast. I actually recently interviewed Robert Picardo, so I'm still talking Star Trek out there. So yeah, you can find me.
Duncan.
You can find me hosting Primitive Culture on Trek FM. You can find me in the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion forum on Facebook. And if you're on Twitter, you can find me at Barrett's Books. That's BARRETT.
Excellent. Thanks so much, gentlemen. We really appreciate you joining us tonight and staying up so late. Live long and prosper. Well, talking with everybody about Star Trek Discovery's third episode is not the only thing we've been discussing here on the network. So take a quick listen to this clip and see what else you may have missed elsewhere on Trek FM.
Previously on Trek.fm, Stage 9, a podcast about the people who make Star Trek.
By getting people like Braga to come on board and work on this show, what they're going to be doing is deconstructing that thing that they did for all those years on Star Trek.
Earl Grey.
Is there anything else we need to add, or do we think that's the...
Are we going to cure Riker, or?
Oh shoot! I forgot about Riker. Yeah, sure, fine. We'll keep him around.
Yeah, we've cured Riker, and then for me, this would or not.
Meta Treks.
Troy's quarters, Data's quarters.
They're very Spartan.
They're very Spartan.
In fact, Data's girlfriend even says they're Spartan.
Yes. And so what does she do? She brings him stuff.
A trinket to fill it up.
to fill it up.
Warp 5.
And this reminds me so much of The Cage. So much of The Cage.
See, I think of... you think of The Cage too, but I also think of what's his name? Baylock in the Corbomite maneuver, right?
Yes. Offering him the drink.
Tranya.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
If you're an Apple user, be sure to hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts on iPhone, iPad, or Apple TV, or the desktop iTunes app to get the latest episodes as soon as they are published. And please leave us a star rating and written review. If you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, in most third-party apps, and you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways for you to do that. The best place is to join the larger conversation is the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, B-A-B-E-L, into the search field on Facebook, and it should come right up. If you'd like to send us an email, you can use the form on our website at trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and select The Edge. That will come right to us. You can also find the network on Twitter at TrekFM and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. Now, Brandon, we did get an email, right?
We got two.
Two! That's right, we did.
Yeah. So the first one we got is short. This one's from Chad Barrett, and it says, okay, with the Discovery crew introduced in Episode 3, I'm getting a Sloan quality from Section 31 from Jason Isaac's character. I'm wondering what you think. And, we did touch a little bit on that in the episode today, but, Aaron Harvey's opinion is, Section 31 is secretive. They're not going to announce and advertise that they're Section 31 people. And while I think that Section 31 may know about this ship and may know what's going on, I don't necessarily think that the ship itself is a Section 31 operation. What do you think about that, Amy?
So you don't think the ship, but I think the crew. I mean, because it seems like Captain Lorca is going to have his way and that Starfleet knows about it and approves it and will grant him whatever he wants.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't necessarily think that he's a Section 31 operative myself. So he might be. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't necessarily think that he is.
Yeah, we will have to wait and see.
So our next email from Isa says, hi to everyone in the network. I came from a culture without last family name, so please call me Isa. English is also my 7th language. 7th? I barely have a handle on 1. Me, English, not very good, and that's my only language.
And you're podcasting?
And I'm podcasting, no. So I apologize for any mistakes I've made. And you know what? The email's pretty good, Isa. I think you did a great job. I've been listening to your programs for some years now. My favorites are Primitive Culture and Metatrex. But my current favorite is The Edge now.
Woohoo!
Thanks very much. Thanks for me coming back to do my post-grad study. I have more time to try and engage in discussion with everyone. Too bad I don't have a Facebook account, so pardon my upcoming barrage of emails this way. Hey, I'm fine with it. We love reading emails on the show, so send away. I enjoyed the live YouTube feed. I think it's great as well. I haven't watched it, but I've been listening to it. Have you been watching it or listening?
Yeah, I've been on both weeks just watching and typing, on the YouTube. Yeah.
Yeah, I got kids, so I got no time to do that stuff.
I saw you were tweeting, though, along, weren't you?
The first one for the Orville, when they did the Orville.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The only improvement I could suggest is to have all the speakers appear on the screen at the same time instead of simultaneously changing for the big screen. I think that's a limitation of the YouTube format myself. I know what you're saying, but it might be a bit distracting to have it changing all the time, but that does help people probably with small screens, be able to have a clear image of who is talking. So I think that's a limitation of the YouTube format itself.
Yeah, and to identify who's talking more.
Anyways.
Yeah.
Much love from a wee girl in Edinburgh. Edinburgh? Edinburgh, that's right. Lee taught me how to say it. Edinburgh. Cheers. Well, Isa, thanks very much for sending the email. We appreciate it. Thanks for feedback. Excellent. Well, I love having a couple of emails to read. I think it's great. But, Amy, we also got some iTunes reviews.
Yes, and so exciting. I just happened to come across these. And you know what? If you do leave us a star rating and written review, it really helps others to find the show. I think the name The Edge doesn't really tie into Discovery as well, but we love it because it's the Edge of Federation. Anyway, so I wanted to read from Alexander Gates, boldly going into the next generation of Star Trek. All your favorite Trek FM hosts come together to discuss the first Star Trek series in the age of podcasting. So very true. In the lead up to the show, they talk all about the rumors, news, behind the scenes information available. When the show airs, we can expect an in-depth discussion of episodes as we'll all share the viewing together, not years removed. The production quality is top-notch, as can be expected from Trek FM shows. The hosts are professional and offer accurate information and interesting speculation. I can't wait to follow the expedition of Discovery together. Thank you, Alexander. And I have another one, Expat X. Says, listening to the episode about everyone reminiscing about VHS recording the shows, this is so great. Yes, we have had some fun discussions leading up. And I'd like to read one more. This is by Inside Outcast. For the first time in podcasting, there is a new Star Trek series, and this podcast offers a series of shows all about it. From early speculation and behind-the-scenes information to a live after show, these knowledgeable and engaging hosts have it covered. Subscribe and enjoy this new and bold frontier in Star Trek podcasting. All right, we have one more by S.J. Sharks Fan 39.
Because it's Greg Mullenby. We got to read Mullenby's.
This is his?
Yeah, that's Greg Mullenby.
Oh, well, Greg, why didn't you just put that? All right. We know Greg and love Greg. It's really hard to judge this podcast on only 3 episodes and a show that won't start until September, because he wrote this in July, thank you. But as a fan of the network, I'm glad they started this show when they did. With Comic-Con behind us now, Star Trek Las Vegas, the excitement for a new series is getting real, and I'm really excited to see what Discovery will bring to the Star Trek mythos. This podcast is pretty much all like the other shows on the network. Insightful, fun commentary, and I can't wait to see how it evolves.
Is that it? Is that it? Just 4?
Yes, Brandon. No, 3.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Well, 4.
We need more to read. Guys, you got to give us more.
Come on.
You got to give us more to read. That's terrible. You got to give us more reviews to read on the show. Rate and review us in iTunes. It helps us out greatly. It makes us be visible in the iTunes feed. And we were tweeting, well, not tweeting, we were messaging back and forth. We were up to like 43rd in TV podcasts. Let's get to number 1.
Yes,
Come on, guys.
we can do
Give
it.
us
We can
rating
do
and
it.
reviews. Give us ratings and reviews. Let's get the Edge up there.
I mean,
And,
you can give us a rating and review like postcards, live, tracks from the Edge. Like all of those shows are the Edge. So we definitely should be getting up to number 1.
Yes, and to everyone who gives us a rating and review, I'll give you $1 million. Doll hairs.
Doll hairs.
Doll hairs. No, I won't give you any doll
Well,
hairs.
all of my students ask if they do something extra, and they're like, Miss Nelson, can we get extra credit? So if you leave us an iTunes written review, I will give you extra credit.
You're bribing your children to rate our show.
And
I
then
love it.
they're like, really? And I said, yes, extra credit in my heart.
Oh, you're not as corrupt as Lorca. That's too bad.
Yeah. Well, you know what? If people want to really help us and keep the show coming to you each week, you should become a patron of the network at Patreon. You know what?
Nice
There's so
transition.
many great perks into joining Patreon. That's patreon.com/TrekFM. And Brandon, you are our Patreon, our patron zone Patreon manager. Tell us about those perks.
You can get early access to episodes. You can get exclusive content. We've had a recent discussion by our Earl Grey crew on the Orville that's exclusive to members of Patron Zone. And you can, for $15 a month, you can join us on our Patrons Roundtable. And last month we had a nice commentary for Encounter at Farpoint. And at the $25 a month level, you can become an associate producer of the show of your choice. And speaking of associate producers, we've got some wonderful associate producers on our show. Now, you know, most of them are pretty good. A couple of them are kind of shady, though. I'm thinking they might be Section 31. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm really thinking so, too. That Norman Lau, he's...
Oh, that's one shady dude.
Yes, exactly.
Yep, and that... Oh, what about that Tony Robbins? Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Tony Robinson?
Section
That
31
dude,
all the way.
Totally.
Yep.
Absolutely all the way. Is there anybody nice in our...
Well, yeah, there are. Is it
Thomas
Paleo?
He's a nice guy.
He is a nice guy.
He's not shady at all, and neither is Lisa Slack.
No.
She's not shady. She's got a heart of gold.
Well, okay, what about Shoaib Mirza?
Pretty nice.
So thank you, listeners, for joining us on The Edge.